dawned on me that I was using the same skills, as a councilman as I was using as a designer. I was, doing my research, problem solving, gathering information, designing solutions, and then selling it to my client, which at that time, now is constituents also. So I'm like, I'm just, I'm designing, just a very large design project.
Hello, I'm Doug Powell. Welcome to This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Throughout Season 2 of the series, I'll be speaking with guests who have established themselves as leaders in design and then have become leaders in a completely different space. Nobody embodies this leadership journey more than my guest for this episode, Bill Grant. Bill is the founder and president of Grant Design Collaborative, the award-winning design firm he has led for over 30 years. Bill is also the mayor of Canton, Georgia, the small town outside of Atlanta where he lives and works. In our conversation, Bill discusses how he has brought his core qualities as a designer into politics and civic leadership with remarkable success. In a time when many small towns are struggling, Canton is thriving under Bill Grant's leadership and now proudly carries the moniker of the coolest small town in America. We join my conversation with Bill Grant as he tells me about his backstory as a designer.
I was born in Dalton, Georgia, the carpet capital of the world, and one of middle of five kids, so I was a proverbial middle child in every possible way imaginable. And, my father actually worked, in the carpet industry and lower middle class family. I never thought about design very much, especially as a kid, or a career option possible. Other than the only thing I can even remotely recall, from that time was, I used to be a big fan of Bewitched, and my mother said, well, if you're going to be, creative, and I always, like to draw and sketch and things like that. I was always, trying to make art in some way, some pathetic little way that I could. But I remember my mother commenting one time, well, if you're going to be creative, why don't you do it for a profession like that Darren Stevens on Bewitched?
And this is Bewitched for our international audience. Bewitched is a classic American TV show of what, the 60s, maybe early 70s.
70s, late 60s, early 70s, yeah. So
and the husband, the character of the husband, Darren Stevens. My gosh, I can't.
Yes.
I can't remember. I can't believe I remember the name.
He was creative director for McMahon and Tate advertising firm. So
that's great. That's great. What a great memory.
Yeah, it was very, very funny. And I didn't think about that, memory for forever. I went to Berry College, which is a liberal arts school, small independent in Rome, Georgia. Went away to school. Majored in English and psychology. I always enjoyed English and literature and psychology. I got a BA in both, and I picked that up along the way somewhere. It wasn't really that intentional, but and so when I was getting close to graduating, I think because that moment of panic. Well, what am I going to do with this? And I took one of the career aptitude tests, and it was funny that the results came back says you are perfect candidate to go into advertising. And I was like, my mom was right, for 7 years ago. And at that time, still, I really had no sense of what that meant or whatever. I was, an English major, so I could write and communicate. Actually wound up doing something that I would never do. As I graduated and did a small stint in the retail business with Federated Department Stores, which was Macy's, and was entertaining, becoming a retail buyer. I thought that sounded interesting, but 6 months into it, and my first Black Friday is like, nope, I'm out of here. So I moved back to Dalton, Georgia. I had an offer from Shaw Industries, which is the largest carpet maker in the world now, owned by Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. But I had written, after I took that aptitude test, I'd written to the CEO, Robert Shaw, and said, my testing says I should be in advertising. Do you have any internships? I need some experience. And got a nice letter back from him saying, we don't really have advertising or marketing, and but appreciate your letter. We'll keep it on file. One of those things, and so never thought about it again until that Black Friday. I lived through it. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something different. And the following Monday, I actually had a call from the HR director at Shaw saying that they had an opening for a copywriter, and was I interested? And I said, hell yeah, I am. So I interviewed for the job, and HR director said, Mr. Shaw actually has your letter still on file. He was so impressed with your letter that he thought you'd make a great copywriter. So I moved back to Dalton and became the first copywriter for Shaw Industries, and writing about carpet and all those beautiful, wonderful things. And was apparently the only person in the Fortune 500 company that could construct a sentence, and found myself 6 weeks into it writing the chairman of the board speech and annual reports. And anyway, long story short, Shaw at that time was buying a lot of smaller companies and went into the commercial floor covering business. And I think after 6 months or so, I was promoted to the marketing manager of commercial flooring. And at that time, they were buying these small companies and bringing them into the fold, which was early branding. We just didn't know what to call it at that time. And so I worked there 5 years. And when I started working there, Shaw was working with an ad agency, a graphic design firm, a copywriter, a PR firm, interior designers on their showrooms, and all those things. And I didn't think that made a lot of sense. So I kind of brought all those people together in-house and built kind of a design department, marketing department for the company. And it was really kind of where I learned about design, and still did the writing. I still do the copy for our clients until this day. I enjoy it. It's where I started out. It's where I'm most comfortable. But I was there for 5 years, and then I was being recruited by a large furniture manufacturer in Michigan, and I was actually on my way to accept the job, and I got halfway to the airport, and it kind of hit me that I had all these people wanting me to do work for them, and I had an opportunity to start my own firm and may not ever have that again. I turned the car around halfway to the airport and went back to Dalton and started my own design firm. So that was 1989, so many, many, many years ago, and have been doing it since. And so I really, again, interesting career, learning by doing. Necessity is the greatest teacher. And I got involved in AIGA Atlanta, the Atlanta chapter. I went to my first AIGA design conference in Chicago. I think it's called Love, Power, Money, 1991. I met Bill Gentile there. He was on stage giving a presentation and talking about himself and his background as a copywriter. And he says, I write copy, but I am a designer. And that hit me because I kind of felt, in most of my design circles, like the whore in church, it was, my training, my education. I didn't go to design school. So had a great conversation with Bill after that. We became good friends. And then at the close,
and this is Bill Gentile. So let's just pause a moment on Bill Gentile, because he's one of those people in my life who really, he had a way of sort of the word I'm this coming to mind is confronting us, those of us who were sort of starting out our career. He was maybe not quite a generation older, but he was more established, and he was just a really provocative, natural leader who had a way of seeing something in emerging designers and just sort of looking at it. Do I have that right, or is that how you
No, very provocative is actually the word as you were searching. I was going to say. He was just very provocative and very straightforward, very down to earth, but, he cut no corners when it came to, communicating what he was thinking. And again, I just really appreciated that and his passion and his story and his background. And, he talked about he didn't go to design school, and all of a sudden I said, well, I'm not the only one. And so it was really, that conference was just so really transformative for me. Remember going through the vendor exhibits, maybe that same night, about while I was there, and I was at the Mohawk Papers booth, and along comes Michael Beirut, heard me say who I was to Laura. Laura, he says, "You should hire these guys. He does a great work. Does a lot of work in carpet." And I'm like just like frozen, because like Michael Beirut knows who I am and knew my name, and it was again, it was a very proud moment. And then when that conference closed, Milton Glaser was the last speaker, and I was feeling really intrigued by the whole thing. And, I remember him, to this day, kind of his closing statement. It was just like, never doubt for one moment that design has the power to change the world. And then I was in tears, because that statement just hit me so strongly. And until that point, I was like, well, I'm doing this because I can make money doing this. And that's, it's what I know how to do. And that's, it's a job. And so after that statement, I became a designer. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I called it. And I wanted the power to change the world in a very positive way, like Milton Glaser did. And there was no looking back after that point. So
I love that. I love that story. And this was a time, you said 1991, at the AIGA National Conference in Chicago. I mean, this was a time when design was, primarily graphic design was sort of the practice that was sort of the primary practice. This was long before digital design and the internet and so on. And the job of a designer in that time was quite tactical. It was very much about making something and getting it out into the world, usually a printed piece of some sort, ink on paper.
Definitely. We used to print things.
yeah, we used to print things. But then, as you described, Milton Glaser, legendary, designer, one of the biggest names in design in the 20th century and beyond, had this bigger idea for what we could be doing with our gifts and our skills and our abilities. And he was like a preacher. He was always sort of revealing that idea to whoever would listen. And I had a similar experience with listening to Milton multiple times over my career. I also remember Tibor Kalman having a very similar. He had a different tone. He was he had a swagger, and he was just kind of a bad boy, kind of attitude. But he would also talk about, hey, we've got a responsibility here. We've got something we can bring to the world that is beyond the stuff that we're doing every day.
Right.
And that was just such a big idea to me.
It was, and I think, it his words, Tibor, Michael Beirut, all of those, my idols, had the thing they had in common is this higher calling for design and designers. And, Milton talking about, designers having the power to change the world, he was really talking about, design with capital D, and not just graphic design, which, I was fascinated with. And I did, I still have a wax gun and ruby lip and things, all those tools, like I still keep those at the office, and I used to have, when students come in and I'm like, I pull those out, like, do you know what this is? And like, no one knows what that is anymore, just like they don't know what Bewitched is anymore. But it was just a really amazing time, transformational. And I feel very fortunate to have been, to met, my idols. I still have idols, but, the classics, and to be in, to be working at that time, and also this very, formative part of my career, and to have those influences. I think AIGA for, making those introductions possible for me. But, at that time, it was basically all about graphic design. AIGA is, the New York-based, graphic designers and the good old boys, and I then got, really involved in the Atlanta chapter and joined the board, and then became the president of the Atlanta chapter, as you mentioned before, as we were setting up here, the leadership retreats and meeting all those people and friends that I still hold dear to this day. But then, getting a call inviting me to join the national board. Again, kind of go back to, always feeling like the whore in church. I'm like, I'm just kind of blown away. And that call came from Michael Beirut, of all people. And then, I was always just really touched by, people welcoming me into that club. And when I got the call from Michael asking me if I'd be interested in being the national president after Michael Vanderbilt, again, is another one of my, idols and someone I'd met in the industry that I work in a lot, and then becoming, the president after Michael was just this, incredible thing for me. Like I was in this dream. But I think, it makes sense. I was talking earlier about looking back now, the path is very atypical and twists and turns, but it all kind of makes sense. And the way that I came in to design was really much self-taught, branding world again before we knew what branding was called. And, I was touching on all these different, multidisciplinary parts of design that because I didn't go to school and as a graphic designer, I didn't, I tell people all the time, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I just worked. And to me, it kind of applied the same skills regardless of the medium, whether it was, a printed piece or a showroom, interior design or, now product design and website, coming on board. And, again, I learned all these things because clients needed those things done.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, as a designer, we have the skills to do that. And so it was the kind of story of my life, and that's really kind of in my era, and I think your era, AIGA. I was the first national president, from the South, but I think the first outside of New York and San Francisco.
Yeah.
I was really proud that I was the first one out of the South. To me, we then did a lot of work, and we, started the business perspectives for design leaders at Harvard, and we talked about design thinking became a thing. We were all kind of grappling with these new forms of expression and how to really promote our worth and our seat at the table. So for me, it was kind of a natural progression.
Yeah.
But I, because of my background, that it is different and varied, and I have this liberal arts background. I think it opened doors for me, but I think it was also right at the time. I tell my clients all the time, great strategy, great design is very important, but great timing is probably the greatest gift of all. So
yes.
It was a good time.
Yes. Well, it's interesting to reflect on that light bulb moment for you, that very powerful moment you told us about a moment ago, with Milton sort of cracking open the idea that there's more for us to do, there's more impact for us to have. And then as you talk about, moving through your experience, different leadership experiences with AIGA, and actually beginning to put some of the, kind of the programmatic pieces together to make that happen. I mean, the Harvard Business School program, which continues on in a different form now with AIGA. I mean, for now, probably hundreds of designers, that has been the way that, that we have been able to realize that potential that we have and to begin to operate at that level. So that's really, really cool how you've kind of connected some dots for us there.
Yeah, and I do remember one of my very first meeting at when I joined the national board of AIGA. We were introducing ourselves, but again, not knowing what I don't know, you ask a question about, our ethical guide or practices. And because I didn't know, I was like, where can I find this information? And, discovered that, it didn't exist. And of course, I was tasked with creating that, or making that happen. And to go from that time where we had no, standards of, practice or ethics, and then to kind of have responsibility in crafting those. And still one of the things I'm very most proud about during my tenure, and that was before became president, but working on that and working with a lot of colleagues on different things. But the very first ethical practices and principles. I went back to my copywriter days and did my research and drafted that very first document, which was interesting and challenging, and I would challenge in the process, or even bringing it up. But I thought it was very important. I think it's still very important. So,
that was a real. I'm remembering back to that real being released, and what we're referring to here was the original form was a series of booklets, right? That were bundled together and were available to AIGA members, and they were a very rich and complete, sort of presentation and articulation of business and ethical, practices and standards that, to your point, I mean, they kind of existed in oral history, or just sort of, handshake. Yeah. But this was the first time that they had been, sort of documented and published and distributed, and there was a real gravity around it.
It was, and so I think that whole era was just really transformative in many ways, not for me, just for me personally, but I think for the profession and a lot of you and our colleagues and peers at the time. The outreach to the chapters grew. AIG grew. The number of chapters that we had was just a fascinating time. I think we were grappling with these business issues and professional standards and proving our value and stating our value, and then how do we talk about design to our clients and business leaders, and those C-level conversations, which I think.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, there was also, I mean, this is sort of an unspoken thread here, but you and I were both not New Yorkers and not San Franciscans, and those were the two, along with perhaps Chicago, also a real sort of hub of the design profession in those years. But simply the geographic and regional expansion of the profession in those years was also notable. That Atlanta, I was based in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities in those years. Both were kind of becoming very established centers of the design profession, along with many other areas around the country.
Internationally with EcoGrata and partnerships, and
there's another thread that emerged here as you were telling your stories that I think is interesting, and that is, you referenced a number of your heroes, a number of those luminaries in the field who you either met, or it sounds like most of them you met or you became close to over the years, and just the idea of having heroes in the field that you're practicing in. I don't know why this is, because we now have so much access to so much data and information, but I don't see young designers having that same sense of identifying their heroes and really sort of modeling after them or emulating or aspiring to. It's interesting that you've really, shaped your backstory around these key people who were so influential to you.
I was having that same conversation just recently with some talking to design students and asking them who the heroes are, and it's almost like deer in headlights, And so, I don't know why that is, other than there's just so much information out there and so many channels, where we as I think we had the institutions, we had the CA, Communications Arts, and print magazine, and AIGA and things. I think back when magazines were still a thing, and those of us who were passionate about design, lived for the CA Design Annual and the AIGA annual, and looking and seeing what our peers had done, and wanting to be like them, and I still have. I recently, just last year, sold the office building that we were in and been there for 27 years, which is crazy. We're talking about time flies. But one of the things I was tasked I had to do is I had a basement full of the building. It was a fairly large building, but it was, CA, Connection Arts and Print magazine and several other magazines, where I had every issue, for 10, 15 years. And, they still had Post-it notes in there, or dog-eared even before Post-it notes were invented. I'm showing my age, but we studied those, and we wanted to be like those heroes. And it's again, there are people out there doing great work every day, but it's hard to. It's not that focused as it was anymore. I guess our channels have just become a lot more fragmented. Just like everything in life, it's more complex and difficult and hard to find people we want to necessarily emulate in a lot of ways. So
I think you're right. Well, you bring up then Grant Design Collaborative. You're a great firm that now 35 years running, or do I have the?
It's 30 years. Again, there were a couple of transition years. The firm I started originally that became Grant Design Collaborative. So it was, there were a couple of great years there, but a good 30 years.
Good solid 30 years. And
it's scary.
And I mean, just an amazing history as a business, and you and your team as really just doing consistently high quality award-winning work. How then do you move from leading a great small business, a great established but kind of discrete sized business, into civic leadership and public service? So going from leading a business into this broader idea of what's happening in the community that we are living and working in. How did that begin for you?
Well, I think like everything else in my journey, it was unintentional.
I sense a pattern here.
I'm a big believer, and I've always told my team that, you have to trust your experience and your knowledge and your thought base, but never, underestimate the power of your intuition, and knowing what feels right, and kind of going back to Joseph Campbell's philosophy of following your bliss, and if it doesn't feel right, then something's not right about it. So I think that I'm always been a big believer in that, and again, my entire story of not going to design school and taking this test and such advertising and just kind of following those things and following opportunities, sometimes out of necessity of, needing to make a living and, put food on the table, growing up in a family where my father worked hard every day, to be able to do that. It was, something embedded in me that's, this is work, this is the job, but having to support myself and, from a very early age and pay my way through school and against that middle child syndrome of being on your own and being independent. So when I started my first design firm in Dalton, because I was there, that's where it started. I had clients there, but eventually, floor covering expanded into furniture and to other areas. And so I wound up having, as many or more clients in the Atlanta market than I had in the Dalton area. And so I was eventually moved to Atlanta because I was going in there and meeting clients, but I was still driving back and forth, which is, hour or more each day. And one night coming home, I saw this exit to Canton, Georgia off the interstate, and never been to Canton in my life, never thought about it. But it seemed it was halfway between Dalton and Atlanta. And so I took the exit, drove 20 minutes down this, country road and wound up in downtown Canton, Georgia, in front of the building that I, bought 6 months later. And was a guy scraping paint. I said, "Who owns this building? It looks pretty cool." And he says, "I do." I said, "What are you doing with it?" He says, "I don't know." And I said, "Can I lease the third floor?" And he said, "Sure. I haven't done any work up there, but you're happy to do it yourself." I said, "That sounds perfect." And so it's just that's how things work in my life. And so anyway, moved the firm to Canton. A year later, I was out for lunch and saw a for sale sign and drove down the drive to this brick house and knocked on the door, and the lady who owned it answered, and I said, "This house looks pretty cool." And I said, "Can I take a look at it?" She said, "Sure." So I walked through it, and I made her an offer on the site, and wound up closing the house a few weeks later. And at the same time, when I moved the firm to downtown Canton, it was just kind of a ghost town because they put the interstate in, just a mile down the road. And so things, people just bypassing downtown, but still had these beautiful buildings and just a great feel to it. And of course, I started running my mouth that, somebody needed to pay attention to this. We needed to kind of design a revitalized downtown. And so I got involved in that, and the mayor at the time, said, "Hey, let's start a committee and I'll put you in charge of it." So I started working to revitalize downtown, and we had some success there. And less than a year after I totally gutted my house and spent all this time and money building my dream home, there was a doctor who bought a house like a block and a half away I'm off the East Main Street in kind of the historic district, and decided that he was going to move his office there into this residential section. And then some other businesses kind of jumped on board, says, "Oh, these historic homes will make great, doctors' offices and professional offices." And so I went to City Hall, and I discovered that one property that was a zoning map error, from several years standing, and would allow him to do that. And so me and all the older ladies in the neighborhood have organized a movement, and to fight City Hall on this zoning and to keep our neighborhood residential. And we fought for about a year and spent a lot of time and money, but we eventually won the zoning battle. And then my neighbors started saying, "Well, you need to run for city council." I was like, "Okay." So of course, I didn't really think much about it and just ran for the first time in 2011. I lost, but I was the out of towner. I ran against someone who was from the area, born and raised in the area, but I still got 42% of the vote, which was pretty good. So I came back in 2013 and ran and won, and started my public service as a city councilman in 2014. I served a term and a half to 2020 as mayor pro tem and city council member. Then the mayor at the time, who had been in office for 3 terms, decided he was going to retire. And of course, everyone said, "Well, you got to run for mayor. You got to run for mayor." So again, I didn't think very much about it. I did it and ran, and was elected 2020. In January, just sworn out, I think January 2nd, 2020, and we know what happened in March 2020. But I have served as mayor since 2020 and was just elected to my second term, 2024 to 2028. That will end my public service career because I've been doing it for 10 years now. So which again, time flies. But again, it's just sort of how it came to be. It wasn't intentional, like, "Hey, I want to get into politics" or anything. It's just more, what can I do to help my community and be a part of that and kind of design a path forward for it. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, almost, you can go back to Milton's call to action in 1991. There's so much that we can do, and seeing both the need and I imagine having, I know how powerful it can be when people come to you and say, "Hey, you'd be really good at this. We need someone like you to do this job." That can be a really compelling draw to a new experience.
Yeah, peer pressure has a lot of
peer pressure.
But there was, another component to it, and you mentioned, Milton's statement about, designers and changing the world, and political climate's been has left a lot to be desired, in recent years. And, I think at the same time, I was feeling a little discouraged about, not feeling like, what can one person do to help change the trajectory? So I thought long and hard about that when people approached me. I didn't take it lightly. I'm just like, I'll do it, whatever, because no one else will. I did think about it and what impact it had on my personal life and the firm, Grant Design Collaborative. And I felt that I couldn't do anything nationally to change, the tide of things, but perhaps I could focus on this little corner of my world and my community. And through my skills, my background, my experience, design a better path forward. I'll be a part of that solution. And it did go back, to Milton and those things. And it was, I felt uneasy about it in a lot of ways, but then once I thought about it, I can provide some leadership. I'd had some success in, the downtown revitalization, and, it was ghost town when I moved Grant Design Collaborative here in 1996. And now downtown Canton is just this thriving, wonderful place, restaurants and shops and breweries. And it's just really wonderful. And we, preserved over, almost 700,000 square feet of historic properties just in this small downtown, 2 streets alone, and seeing the adaptive reuse of the old cotton mill on the river and things of that nature. And so for me, when I was first elected, when reality hit that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do this. And, I was running between the design firm and City Hall several times a day. I'm like, what have I gotten myself into? And I felt like I had these 2 different jobs and 2 different, personalities. And I was really stressing out about it until again, it kind of dawned on me that I was using the same skills, as a councilman, as I was using as a designer. I was, doing my research, problem solving, gathering information, designing solutions, and then selling it to my client, which at that time, now is constituents also. So I'm like, well, I'm just, I'm designing, it's just a very large design project. And after that point, I said, well, I'm just doing the same thing, 2 different places. And so to me, that was a way of, and maybe I just needed to justify that in my mind. Again, I don't know what I don't know. So I didn't know anything about politics or local government, but, I knew how to design better solutions. And so like when COVID hit, 2 months into my term as mayor, my first instinct was to pull back. I had ran on, even going back to 2011, my first time running for council, that there was not a master plan for the city. There wasn't a business plan. And to me, that was very inefficient. And, we were approaching developers, zoning projects, it was one a single solution and not how they related to, other wards in the city. And so Grand Design Collaborative, we've kind of moved into this real strategic realm with our clients. So we're doing brand roadmaps. So they're, 5-10 year visions for a brand and what it can become, and really designing a path forward for that brand, so it can kind of stay on a consistent path and message. So again, I kind of defaulted to what I know, and said, well, we don't have a master plan for the city. We need to give direction, citizens and businesses, especially during this crazy time. So kind of spent that first year working with council and convinced them that we needed a roadmap for the city. So we did that in the first year. We were working remotely, meeting remotely. So I actually had a little bit more time. The firm at the time, clients kind of stopped doing anything there for several months. So I actually kind of had the freedom to think about the city a little bit more strategically. So at the last council meeting in December of 2020, we adopted what we call the Roadmap for Success, which is a 15-year plan, which really is a design plan, and started implementing it. And, with huge success, after the first 2 years of implementing the plan and kind of getting everyone, planning their work and working their plan, we became a lot more efficient. In our 15-year projects that we had in the roadmap, we were able to complete, almost 75% of those in 2 years. To me, again, kind of following what I didn't run as a politician because I had no credentials in that. I ran as a designer and I was proud of it. It's like, we need design solutions. We need design thinking, in City Hall. We don't need more political or government thinking, because just look around you, that's not working. So let's figure out something different here. So
what a great great telling of that story, and what I'm so impressed by, and what I see in so many designers who are moving into leadership roles in different ways, usually kind of promoted into a new role in in their sort of career path at a company, and having a lot of the same sort of initial reaction that you described, that kind of imposter syndrome, and I don't know how to operate at this level, and there's a lot of issues or factors that I just don't understand. And then as you described, your experience when you were able to look around and say, wait a second, this is actually a big design project, a different one that I'm used to working on, but it's essentially got the same components. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to have a transformational effect for you, that suddenly it became, maybe not suddenly, but over time it came to make more sense, and you were able to function in a very effective way once you were able to kind of have that context for it.
Yeah, once I came to that realization and really kind of justified it for myself, perhaps, the kind of going back to those early days of my design career where I felt out of place, didn't have the confidence, that I belonged there. I went from, oh my God, I don't know nothing about, politics or government, to, by God, I'm a designer and I know how to do shit. So then it became, I had all the confidence in the world that, this was not insurmountable. And again, especially less than 3 months into my term in the pandemic, it was funny because during the pandemic, there was Harvard connected all these local leaders. And in this program, I forget what it's called, but it was back to my Harvard Business School, program. And, I was on Zoom calls with, President Obama and President Bush and, President Clinton and Madeleine Albright, and all these, amazing people, talking about how, we could come together to kind of solve some of these issues, because my colleagues and my fellow mayors, in Georgia and across the country, just hearing the horror stories they were facing, they lost, they had to lay off their entire, almost the entire city staffs, and, the budgets and shortfalls, and, all the businesses that were closing. And of course, again, my business was severely impacted, but because we had a plan and started working that plan, I think because we thought differently, approached the problems differently, we were a lot more successful in overcoming, totally bypassing some of those huge issues. We never reduced our staff in the city. Downtown in 2020, businesses in small towns were kind of closing left and right. We added like 18 new businesses and a lot of restaurants. And so it was really a moment. And then in 2022, 1 year after implementing our roadmap for success, Canton was awarded the Visionary City of the Year for the state, and because of the roadmap. And a lot of people talk about, well, they took a very different approach. And then I had other mayors, and I still have mayors who visit us in Canton, like, how did you do this? And who did you hire? What consultant, group did you hire to do your roadmap? And so we just, did it. And it's really hard for them to kind of grasp. I said, well, you just basically just, listen to your constituents, what their problems are, and I can kind of go back to, the little red book that we did in AIGA, that, define the problem, design the solution, sell and implement, and I kind of relied on those, those skills and what I've learned, through AIGA, through design. And then comes this moment of great pride, that designers can do this, and designers, I think, are as well or better equipped to make this positive change, have the power to change the world, as Milton would say, and certainly, career politicians or there are great people out there doing public service, and it's, it is an admirable, call, and it is a calling, and because I don't think anyone would choose it just to do it for the love of it, because it's challenging work. But there are people out there doing great work every day. But for me, it's like, hey, elect a designer. They'll fix the story, or at least bring a different perspective to the table.
When you have a visiting mayor or a leader from another community, and they're impressed by what you've done, and they're asking about it, do you put it in design terms for them? Do you use that language, those words, or is it, as you were describing it a moment ago, it was almost like, yeah, we listened, and then we we envisioned a solution, we implemented, etc.
Right.
What actual words do you use, and how do they respond to that?
I think I do. I mean, I talk. I tell them that I don't know what I don't know, and I did not approach this from your perspective, because a lot of the mayors come from council and from working on city staff and other things, and what I tell them as a designer and as a hopefully on occasion successful mayor, is that the power of design is producing those visual results that citizens can see, can touch, can experience. And you start talking about change and there's all this fear, and it's like, no, we can't change, we can't do that, because people are afraid of the unknown. But when you revitalize, take an old high school and turn it in that a lot of the constituents went to, in the city, and transform it, preserve it, and transform it into our new city hall. In my mayor's office, or the old principal's office, which I get a kick out of, but show them that this change can happen, and we can still have great things such as preservation, and but also take a old cotton mill that was about to fall down and collapse, and now there's breweries and shops and restaurants. Those are things that can actually are tangible to them, they can experience and touch. I tell my fellow mayors is that when you're talking about these intangible things, you're just talking about change, you're talking about money and taxes and what's required, and people can't really comprehend that, and they're afraid of all those things. And we're designing the process of designing what I pinned as the coolest small town in America, and that's really our hashtag that I started that about 10 years ago, and it was more an aspiration, like, well, just throw it out there, and maybe people start believing it someday. Now I believe it's true, because you can look around and it's very cool. We have trails, and we have shops and restaurants and breweries and art galleries and these things that people love and enjoy. But we've also, because of the plan and designing a great solution, we also have the lowest millage rate we've ever had in the city's history. We're over 100 years old in Canton, almost 150 years old. So you can have this fiscal responsibility as well. So you start talking about taxes and all the government things that people love to complain about or don't want to deal with. Is like, yes, you can have both. It's all part of the design. We as designers have clients, and they all have a budget. And like I say, the city's just a really large design project with a $90 million budget. So it's a little bit more than I'm used to dealing with. But you still have to spend your client's money very carefully, and you got to produce results for them to hire you for the next project or to keep you on board. And it is really the same concept. And I think with the roadmap, you kind of have to put it like talking to the mayors about design doesn't always work. And so you can't really talk to citizens about, strategic plans and all, because, there's some gloss over it. They don't give a shit about that. So you start talking about roadmap, and let's move in this direction. And let's, our roadmap has 8 different tenets, like creating great neighborhoods and sustaining natural resources and leading with excellence and those things. But it's in terminology that it came from them, because we started our research with them. What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? Start with some basic questions, but then we're kind of putting it in their terms. It's a roadmap, it's a direction. Let's follow this to get to our final destination, and kind of going back to, again, as a copywriter's communication and vocabulary and designing a solution that can resonate with your clients, in this case, constituents. So,
yeah, I love it. I love hearing all of those connections, and there's so many lessons in your story, Bill, and I always love hearing you sort of reflect on this journey. Let me close by asking what advice or guidance you would give to to designers who are earlier in their career, who are, kind of envisioning the path forward? Any nuggets that you like to pass along as you're working with emerging designers?
Always surround yourself with good people and people you can learn from. There's 4 of us at Grand Design Collaborative. We've been only a 4-member team since 2010. I'm going to have to train Elizabeth Seidel, been with me now for over 22 years. Kurt Seidel, Elizabeth's husband, is the new kid on the block. He's been there 17 years. So it's just the 4 of us, and we're small and focused. I learn from them every day. They inspire me every day. And so just look for people, projects, clients that will inspire you and desire to change the world, in very powerful ways, through your work, through your passion as a designer. And never underestimate that, as Milton Glacier would say, that you have the power to change the world. And I think love to see a designer in the White House one day designing a better country, so we can sure use it. So,
Bill Grant, what a delightful conversation. I'm so grateful to you for, your reflections and your stories and your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the great work you're doing. So
that's all for this episode of This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Special thanks to Scott Leach of Brand Speak Communications for his production assistance, and to Graham Barton for his original theme music. I'd love for you to help me grow the audience for this podcast by liking and following it on your favorite podcast platform. And I'd also love your help finding great design leaders for future episodes of the show. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with your ideas. You can find out more about my work as a design leader on my website, dougpowell.design. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.